When my wife, Laura, walked into my office that morning with a folder clutched to her chest and that rehearsed calm on her face, I already knew what it was. Divorce papers. You can sense that kind of energy, cold, rehearsed, and final. I didn't flinch when she dropped the folder on my desk. I just looked at her, really looked, and realized that somewhere between all the late nights and the forced smiles, we'd stopped being a marriage and turned into a negotiation. "You'll hear from my lawyer," she said quietly, like she was doing me a favor. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. "Your lawyer?" I repeated, as if the word itself amused me. "Yes," she said. "You know what's fair? I've given years of my life to this marriage and to your business." I tilted my head slightly. "My business?" Her expression shifted, just enough to reveal what this was really about. Not love, not resentment. It was money. Laura and I had been married for 6 years. When we first met, she was working in marketing for a mid-sized firm. Smart, articulate, and confident, she had that effortless social charm that could turn any room in her favor. I admired that once. Back then, I was still grinding 12 hours a day, trying to turn a small construction startup into something real. She saw the ambition in me and called it potential. That word alone hooked me. She made me feel seen when nobody else did. The first few years were good. We were a team. She helped me pitch to clients, gave feedback on branding, and even drafted the early website copy. I'll give her that. She was sharp. But as the business grew, she changed. She went from supporting me to believing she was part of the operation. Not in spirit, on paper. That distinction would later become everything. I didn't argue back that morning. I just smiled faintly and said, "I'll look it over." She paused at the door, confused. Maybe she expected a scene. Tears, shouting, pleading, anything but calm acceptance. "You're not going to fight me on this?" she asked. "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "You deserve what's fair." Her lips curved in a small, satisfied smile. She mistook composure for surrender. I've learned most people do. After she left, I opened the folder. Sure enough, divorce petition, property division proposal, and the cherry on top, a claim for half of my company. Not assets, not shared property, the business itself. Half of something she never built. That was the moment I exhaled slowly and realized this wasn't a breakup. It was a transaction. And like any transaction, it came down to documentation, signatures, and ownership. She wanted half my business? Fine. She could have half of what was legally hers. And I already knew the truth. On paper, she didn't exist. I didn't gloat. Not yet. The time for that would come later, when she'd be sitting across from me in court, flanked by her attorney, realizing the very foundation of her case was a ghost. For now, I played the part, the blindsided husband. I texted her that evening, told her I understood, told her we'd handle things amicably. It was the only way to keep her from seeing how quietly I was preparing the storm she'd never recover from. She thought she was taking half of my empire. I was about to show her she never owned a brick. Long before Laura even thought about lawyers, before the first argument about what's fair, I'd already built my safeguards. The idea came from my father, years before he passed. He used to say, "Never build something without a structure that outlives people's emotions." At the time, I thought he was talking about blueprints. Turns out, he meant ownership. My father ran his own small construction firm back in the day. Nothing big. A few crews, some trucks, and his name painted on the side of every vehicle. But when he got sick, I handled everything. Doctors, bills, business closures. Before he passed, he asked me to set up a family trust to manage what little he had left, land, savings, and the remaining contracts he was owed. I did it quietly, and when he was gone, I left the trust open but dormant. I didn't think I'd ever use it again. Then came my own company, Halstead Build and Design. Started it from scratch after my father's funeral. Registered the name, bought the tools, rented a small office. Every risk, every late night, every client, all mine. But I remembered his words. So when it started growing, when money finally started coming in, I didn't register it under myself. I placed it entirely under my late father's trust, Halstead Family Holdings. The trust owned the business. I was just the manager. My name appeared nowhere on ownership documents. Not one line. At the time, Laura thought it was just sentimental, keeping my father's name alive. She even bragged about it to her friends. He named his business after his dad, she'd say, smiling proudly. not realizing that in doing so, she was bragging about her own irrelevance to the legal structure. She never questioned it. Why would she? As far as she knew, we were a family. We shared everything. What she didn't understand was that trust documents don't care about emotions or promises. They care about signatures. And hers wasn't on a single one. The irony? She helped me pick out the company logo. She was there when we bought our first office furniture. She even threw a launch dinner when I hired my first crew. All the while, the business, the accounts, the assets, even the vehicles, were property of a trust that legally recognized only one name, my late father's. Still, I didn't set this up to trick her. Back then, I did it for protection. Contractors get sued all the time. One bad project, and you can lose everything. I wanted a barrier. I never thought that barrier would one day protect me from my own wife. But in hindsight, it was perfect. When Laura started acting distant, I noticed. The late-night texts. The work dinners that stretched past midnight. She'd changed how she spoke to me. Less warmth, more edge. And every conversation about the business carried an undertone, like she was measuring something in her head. That's when I knew she wasn't just drifting. She was calculating. So, I started my own calculations. I reviewed every document, made sure every filing was airtight, every amendment up to date. Even transferred part of the trust's assets into long-term contracts, money she'd never trace. By the time she finally filed for divorce, thinking she'd get half of my company, she didn't realize she was fighting a ghost corporation owned by a man who'd been dead for 10 years. I almost pitied her. Almost. It's strange how betrayal rarely arrives with thunder. Most times, it comes in whispers, changed habits, new colognes, laughter that sounds practiced. Laura's began that way. A few missed calls, a few late nights at the office, and a sudden need to keep her phone face down whenever I was around. I wasn't the kind of man who checked phones or followed cars. I believed in letting people show me who they are, and she did, slowly, carelessly. One evening, she came home glowing. Not the tired, overworked glow of accomplishment, but that lightness you only see in someone who feels seen again. She poured herself a glass of wine, humming softly while scrolling her phone. I asked about her day, and she said, "Oh, just the usual. We had a meeting that ran late. Daniel from marketing covered for me." She said his name like it was nothing. Daniel. The same coworker she'd been mentioning for months. The one who always seemed to need her input after hours. I didn't react, just nodded and sipped my own drink. But the silence that followed said more than words. I could feel something shifting in the air, something irreversible. That night, when she went to take a shower, her phone buzzed on the counter. The name, Daniel, flashed across the screen. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I already knew. The next few weeks were quiet, too quiet. She grew distant, colder, started sleeping on her side of the bed like we were two strangers renting the same space. Every conversation became a transaction. Can you pick up the dry cleaning? The mortgage is due on Friday. Nothing human, nothing soft. But what sealed it wasn't the distance, it was the arrogance. She started talking down to me. Small remarks about how she carried the image of the company, how she helped shape the business. I'd watch her lean back in her chair, swirl her wine, and speak like she'd built the walls with her own hands. That was when I decided to stop correcting her. Let her believe it. Let her inflate her role until she thought she deserved half of something she never touched. The night I confirmed the affair, I was at a client dinner. One of my subcontractors, an honest guy, leaned over and said, "Hey, didn't I see your wife at the Meriton with that tall guy from Orion Marketing?" My stomach didn't drop. My pulse didn't spike. I just smiled faintly and said, "Probably. She does business with them." He nodded, oblivious. But in that moment, I felt something inside me harden. Not anger, not jealousy, just clarity. After that, I stopped trying to fix the marriage. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped caring about what she did or didn't do. My energy shifted completely toward one thing, preparation. I met with my lawyer the next week. We went over everything, quietly, privately. I asked him a single question. If she tries to claim ownership of Halstead Build and Design, what's her standing? He looked at the documents, chuckled, and said, "She has none. Your father's trust owns everything. You're just an employee in legal terms. There's nothing for her to divide." That was the first time in months I allowed myself to breathe. I thanked him, paid the consultation fee in cash, and walked out knowing the war was already over. She just didn't know it yet. When I got home that night, she was already asleep. Her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. Daniel. I looked at the name one more time, then turned off the lamp and went to bed beside her, calm, collected, and quietly counting down the days until her illusion shattered in court. The weeks leading up to the court hearing felt like waiting for a storm I had already built the shelter for. Laura, on the other hand, was radiant. She walked around with that careless lightness of someone who believed she'd already won. She'd moved out by then, rented a sleek condo downtown. Every post she made on social media looked like a rebranding campaign for her new life. New hair, new wardrobe, new freedom. I didn't comment. I didn't even look twice. But I noticed the captions, small, sharp lines meant to sting. Starting fresh, she wrote once. Sometimes you have to let go of what holds you back. Apparently, I was what held her back. Her lawyer was a man named Robert Ellison. Polished, silver-haired, the kind of attorney who thrives on public humiliation. He sent the first letter, a demand for an immediate settlement of assets, including half of Halstead Build and Design. His tone was smug, heavy with certainty. You could almost hear the condescension between the lines. I replied through my lawyer with one sentence. My client is open to a fair division of marital property. That single line changed everything. It made them think I was open, reasonable, maybe even intimidated. Let them relax, I thought. The deeper the illusion, the louder the silence when it breaks. Meanwhile, I watched Laura's spending spiral. She'd already maxed out one of our joint cards, the one she assumed I was still paying off. I wasn't. I'd closed that account the day she left. Quietly, efficiently. She didn't even realize the card was being rejected until she tried using it in front of friends. My lawyer later told me her team mentioned it. Apparently, she blamed it on a bank error. The day of our first pre-hearing conference, she arrived early. I saw her through the glass door, sharp suit, confident walk, smiling at her lawyer like she was about to watch my empire crumble. I walked in a few minutes later, calm, no expression. She didn't greet me. I didn't expect her to. Robert started with his rehearsed arrogance. Your Honor, my client has contributed significantly to the establishment and growth of Mr. Halstead's business. We are seeking an equitable division of the company's value. I stayed silent while my lawyer opened the folder I'd handed him weeks before, trust documents, registration papers, and tax filings. He slid them across the table. Your Honor, he said evenly. The company in question is owned by the Halstead Family Trust, established in 2012, 3 years before the marriage. My client is the acting manager, not the owner. The trust owns all assets, and Mrs. Halstead has no legal claim to any portion. Robert blinked, visibly thrown off. He reached for the papers, scanning them quickly, his confidence cracking just enough for me to notice. Laura frowned, confusion clouding her face. She turned to me. What is this? I met her eyes, calm as stone. It's the structure of the business you keep calling ours. Silence stretched across the room. Even the judge looked at her with mild pity. Robert cleared his throat, stammering something about due diligence, but the damage was done. I didn't smile. Not yet. The real moment, the one that would crush whatever pride she had left, was still to come. That hearing ended with a scheduling notice for the next session. Laura walked out stiffly, still pretending control. She didn't speak to me, but her posture said everything. Denial, confusion, fear beginning to bloom. I watched her step into the elevator, clutching her purse like it could anchor her to something solid. The door closed between us, and that was the first time I allowed myself a quiet smile. She thought she was walking into a victory. What she didn't realize was that she had just walked into a void, one where she legally didn't exist. After that first hearing, Laura went silent for a few days. No calls, no emails, no smug social media posts. I could tell she was regrouping, trying to make sense of what she'd just heard. But people like Laura don't stay quiet for long. Silence isn't in their nature. They need noise, attention, validation, a narrative where they're still the hero. By the next week, her lawyer sent another letter. This one was longer, sharper, dripping with desperation disguised as professionalism. Our investigation suggests Mr. Halstead may be concealing assets under the name of the Halstead Family Trust. It read. We demand full financial disclosure. I almost laughed. Concealing assets? The trust wasn't a disguise. It was a legal entity built years before she ever said, "I do." But I let my lawyer handle it. His reply was short, surgical, and lethal. All requested documents have already been submitted. Any further insinuation of concealment is unfounded and defamatory. I pictured Robert's face when he read that, the kind of slow realization that he was playing chess against someone who'd already seen the endgame. Still, they tried. They pulled bank records, contacted suppliers, even reached out to clients pretending it was part of a routine audit. Nothing. Every trail led back to the same place. The Halstead Family Trust, managed by me, owned by my late father's estate, operating entirely within the law. Laura must have been losing her mind. She started calling mutual friends, spinning her version of the story. "He's hiding money," she said. "He's using some loophole to cheat me." But the more she talked, the worse she sounded. People began pulling away. Nobody wants to be around desperation. It clings to you like smoke. Her confidence began to crack. The night before the second hearing, she showed up at my office unannounced. She walked in like she still belonged there, though everything about the space, the clean desks, the quiet hum of work, the new receptionist who didn't recognize her, said otherwise. "Can we talk?" she asked, standing in the doorway. I closed the file I was reading and leaned back. "About what?" "You don't have to do this," she said. "We can still settle. I just want what's fair." I studied her for a long second. "Fair," I repeated. "You mean half of a company you never owned? Half of something that legally isn't mine to divide?" Her jaw tightened. "You know what I mean." "No," I said quietly. "That's the problem. You don't." She blinked fast, holding back frustration. "After everything I did for you." "You supported me," I interrupted. "And I appreciate that. But support isn't ownership, Laura. You can't demand equity in something you didn't build, fund, or register." Her silence said it all. She hadn't come for fairness. She'd come to negotiate her ego. When she realized I wasn't budging, she turned sharply and walked out. The sound of her heels faded down the hallway, and for the first time since this started, I felt nothing. Not anger, not relief, just calm. She was beginning to understand. The woman who once thought she could take everything was now chasing something that didn't exist. And in a few days, I'd make sure the entire courtroom understood that too. The second court session was held on a gray Thursday morning, the kind of day that already feels heavy before it even begins. I arrived early, suit pressed, files organized, every document neatly tabbed in the folder resting on my lap. I didn't need to review them again. I knew every page by heart. When Laura walked in, I noticed it immediately. The confidence was gone. She tried to fake it, shoulders back, chin up, but her eyes gave her away. Fear has a way of dimming even the brightest personality. Robert, her lawyer, however, came in loaded for war. He had that kind of grin that belongs to a man who still believed he could spin facts into victory. He began with theatrics. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe the respondent's business operations are intentionally structured to obscure ownership and mislead this court about marital assets." The judge, an older woman with little patience for grandstanding, raised an eyebrow. "You're accusing him of fraud?" "Not directly," Robert said, pacing. "But we find it suspicious that a man who runs and profits from a company can claim he doesn't own it." My lawyer didn't flinch. He stood, walked forward, and placed two binders on the table, one labeled Trust Formation 2012, the other Halstead Build and Design, Ownership Documentation. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "the trust formation predates this marriage by 3 years. The business was established by the trust, not by my client personally. Mrs. Halstead's name appears on none of the founding, registration, or operational documents. We have IRS records, bank filings, and verified statements to confirm this." The judge flipped through the first binder, glanced at a few highlighted sections, and nodded slowly. "I see." Robert's voice cracked slightly when he spoke again. "Even so, the spirit of the marriage." "The court doesn't rule on spirit, counselor," the judge interrupted sharply. "We rule on paper." That line hung in the air like a verdict. Laura's shoulders stiffened. When my lawyer handed over the final piece, a certified copy of my father's death certificate attached to the trust, the realization hit her in real time. Everything she thought she owned, every dollar she planned to walk away with, every ounce of vengeance she'd imagined, all of it vanished with one document bearing a name from the grave. By the time the judge adjourned, Robert's confidence had evaporated. He muttered something about reviewing options, but the way he avoided Laura's eyes said everything. As I packed up my papers, Laura whispered, "You planned this." I paused. "No," I said quietly. "I just built my life carefully. You assumed that meant you'd inherit half." I walked past her without looking back. The war was over, only she hadn't accepted her defeat yet. But soon, she'd have no choice. By the time the final hearing came around, Laura was unraveling. The flawless woman who once glided through every room now walked like she was carrying invisible weight. She'd stopped posting online, stopped smiling for effect. Even her lawyer looked drained, like he'd realized he was fighting a ghost with a stick. The courtroom was half full that morning. Routine divorce proceedings rarely draw a crowd, but word travels fast in small circles. A few of Laura's friends were there, faces tight with pity disguised as curiosity. I sat quietly, hands folded, watching the clock tick toward the moment I'd been waiting for. Robert began weakly, trying to sound composed. "Your Honor, even if the business was registered under the trust, we believe Mr. Halstead benefited personally from its profits, thus making them subject to division." My lawyer stood up, calm as ever. "Your Honor, we anticipated this argument." He handed over a final folder, one I'd prepared months ago, long before Laura filed anything. Inside were financial statements proving that every cent of income went through the trust. My salary was modest, reported, and separate. I didn't draw profits. The trust reinvested them into projects, assets, and retained earnings. On paper, and in reality, I was just an employee. The judge skimmed through, expression steady, then looked up. "So, Mr. Halstead, if this trust were to dissolve, who would inherit?" "My father's appointed successors," I said. "Legally, that's my godfather and a charitable board he named." It was his way of keeping the business tied to his legacy. The judge nodded. "Very well." That was it. One sentence, and the case collapsed. Robert leaned toward Laura, whispering something urgent. She didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the desk, her fingers trembling slightly. The judge's ruling came like the slow toll of a bell. "This court finds that the company in question is not marital property and will not be included in the division of assets." The silence that followed was deep, heavy. Laura exhaled sharply, as if she'd been punched in the stomach. Then came my turn to speak. I stood, straightened my jacket, and said, "Your Honor, I have no intention of seeking alimony or damages. I only ask that the court formally recognizes the trust's sole ownership and closes any future claims from Mrs. Halstead." The judge nodded. "Granted." And that was it. I didn't look at Laura when it ended. There was nothing left to say. As I walked past her table, she reached out, just slightly, fingers brushing the edge of my sleeve. "You made sure I got nothing," she whispered. I paused. "No," I said softly. "You made sure you earned nothing." Her hand dropped. Outside, the air felt lighter than it had in months. The rain had stopped, and the city hummed quietly around me. For the first time since this all began, I smiled. Not out of triumph, but peace. Because she finally understood what I had known all along. Power doesn't come from what you own. It comes from what can't be taken. A month after the ruling, life went back to a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Quiet mornings, black coffee, the sound of my crew laughing out in the yard before starting a job. No lawyers, no accusations, no stage smiles. Just peace, the kind that doesn't announce itself, it just settles in and stays. Laura didn't take the loss well. Word spread quickly. Small-town gossip moves faster than truth. People who once admired her confidence now whispered about her downfall in hushed tones. She'd built her entire identity around appearances, and now that image had cracked in public. A mutual friend called me one evening, voice low. "She's been having a rough time," he said. "Her boyfriend left. Guess he didn't sign up for the court drama or the headlines." I thanked him and changed the subject. I wasn't interested in her chaos. I'd already spent years living in it. Still, I heard things. How she tried to appeal, only for it to be dismissed. How the legal fees drained her savings. How the condo she flaunted online had quietly gone up for rent a few weeks later. Every move she made was another silent admission of defeat. Me? I kept building. The business grew faster than ever. New contracts, new partners, even a few government projects. When people congratulated me, I just smiled and said, "Hard work pays off." No one needed to know the storm I'd weathered to get here. One afternoon, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name written in the same neat handwriting I'd once known by heart. Inside was a single note. You were right. I was never part of what you built. I just thought being beside you meant I'd earned it. I see now that's not how things work. I'm sorry. No signature. She didn't need one. I folded the letter and slipped it into my desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that trust, once broken, doesn't get rebuilt with apologies. It gets buried, like the dead weight it is. That night, I drove to my father's old property, the land that started it all. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty field. I stood there for a long while, thinking about everything. Him, the business, the woman who tried to claim what wasn't hers. Thanks for the lesson, old man, I said quietly. You were right, structures outlive emotions. The wind picked up, soft and steady, moving through the grass like an answer. As I turned to leave, I realized something. She hadn't just lost the case. She'd lost the illusion that she could destroy me. And I hadn't just won. I'd outgrown the part of myself that needed her approval to feel whole. People often say revenge is sweet. They're wrong. The sweetest thing is peace, earned, quiet, and untouchable. And that's what I walked away with. Dear listeners, our story has come to an end. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments.